You think a black Amex card gives you the right to treat people like dirt? Think again. Meet Sarah, a struggling law student working double shifts just to keep the lights on. She thought her night was ruined when 4 arrogant, wealthy trust fund babies sat in her section, ran up a 5-figure tab, and then, with a cruel laugh, refused to pay a single cent. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they ruled the world. But they didn't notice the quiet, grey-haired man sitting in the booth right behind them. A man who didn't just own the restaurant. He owned the very companies these men worked for. You are not going to believe the instant karma that hits in the final moments of this story. Let's get into it. The polished mahogany doors of L'Argent, the city's most exclusive steakhouse, swung open with a heavy, expensive whoosh. Sarah tightened her grip on the empty serving tray, her knuckles turning white. It was 8:45 p.m. on a Friday. The air inside the restaurant smelled of truffle oil, aged leather, and old money. Sarah hated Fridays. She adjusted her black waistcoat, checking her reflection in the brass pillar near the kitchen. Dark circles were expertly concealed with concealer, but her eyes looked tired. She was 3 months behind on her tuition at Columbia Law, and her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had slipped an eviction notice under her door that morning. She needed tips tonight. She needed a miracle. "Sarah, table 4 is yours," the floor manager, chaotic and sweating, whispered as he rushed past. "VIPs, daddy's money. Be fast, don't make eye contact, and for God's sake, don't let them see you sweat." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She looked toward table 4, the prime booth in the center of the room, elevated slightly so the occupants could look down on the rest of the dining floor. They were walking in now, 4 of them. They moved like a pack of wolves in Italian suits. Leading the pack was Brad. He was tall, with slicked-back blonde hair and a jawline that looked like it had been bought, not born. He wore a suit that cost more than Sarah's entire education. Behind him were his disciples. Trent, a stocky guy with a permanent sneer, Hunter, who was already scrolling on his phone, and Spencer, who looked nervous but desperate to fit in. They didn't wait to be seated. They simply marched to the center booth, ignoring the hostess who was trying to guide them. Sarah approached the table, her notepad ready. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to L'Argent. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with—" "Water," Brad interrupted, not looking up from the leather-bound menu. He tossed the menu onto the table with a slap. "Sparkling, and not the domestic trash. Bring us the Voss, 4 bottles. Ice on the side, but don't put the ice in the glass. It waters down the bubbles." Trent snickered, nudging Hunter. "She looks like she's about to cry already, Brad. Go easy on the help." "I'm not crying," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'll get that water right away." "And bread?" Hunter barked, finally looking up. His eyes raked over her uniform with disdain. "But only if it's fresh. If it's hard, I'm throwing it at you." They burst into laughter. It was a cruel, hollow sound that cut through the ambient jazz music of the restaurant. Sarah turned on her heel, her face burning. She walked briskly toward the kitchen, dodging other servers. As she passed table 6, a small, secluded booth in the shadowy corner near the kitchen doors, she slowed down. A solitary old man sat there. He was wearing a fraying tweed jacket and reading a paperback novel that looked like it had been through a war. He had a pot of cheap Earl Grey tea in front of him. "Rough night already, Sarah?" the old man asked, without looking up from his book. Sarah forced a smile. "Just the usual, Arthur. The wolves are out tonight." Arthur hummed, turning a page. "Wolves often forget that there are lions in the jungle, too." "Keep your head up, kid. How's the law study going?" "Expensive?" Sarah sighed. I have to go, Arthur. They want water without ice, but ice on the side. Philistines, Arthur muttered. Sarah rushed to the bar. As she loaded the heavy glass bottles onto her tray, she looked back at table 4. Brad was standing up, mimicking a golf swing in the middle of the aisle, nearly hitting a passing busboy. He was loud, obnoxious, and radiating the kind of entitlement that made Sarah's blood boil. She didn't know it yet, but this table wasn't just going to be difficult. They were going to try to ruin her life. She returned to the table, placing the glasses down with surgical precision. She poured the water. Too fast, Brad criticized, watching the bubbles settle. You poured it too aggressively. You bruised the carbonation. Sarah blinked. I bruised the water? Yes. Pour it again. New glass. Brad waved his hand dismissively, as if she were a fly. I'm afraid we charge for every open bottle, sir, Sarah said politely. Brad looked at his friends, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Did you hear that, boys? She thinks I care about the charge. He leaned forward, his cologne overpowering. Honey, I could buy this building and turn it into a parking lot for my jet skis. Pour it. Again. Sarah took a breath, swallowed her pride, and reached for a fresh glass. She needed this job. She needed the money. Just survive the night, she told herself. Just survive. By 9:30 p.m., the bill at table 4 had already surpassed $3,000. They had ordered the seafood tower, but only ate the lobster claws, leaving the rest to spoil. They ordered the Wagyu beef carpaccio, but complained it was too cold after letting it sit for 20 minutes while they argued about cryptocurrency. Sarah was running a marathon. Every time she approached the table, the demands became more erratic and humiliating. My napkin fell, Spencer said, pointing to the linen cloth on the floor. Sarah bent down to pick it up. No. Brad stopped her with a sharp snap of his fingers. Get a fresh one, and use tongs. I don't want your germs on my linen. Sarah stiffened. I washed my hands, sir. Tongs, Brad repeated, staring her dead in the eyes. She went to the service station, her hands trembling, and retrieved a pair of silver tongs. She brought a fresh napkin and placed it on his lap using the metal instrument. Good girl, Brad sneered. See? You can be trained. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She walked away quickly, her vision blurring slightly. She retreated to the back station to fill water pitchers, needing a moment to breathe. They're animals, whispered Marco, the sommelier, as he uncorked a bottle of Chateau Margaux beside her. That guy, Brad? That's Brad Sterling. His father is the CEO of Sterling and Kobish Investment. He thinks the world exists to serve him. He's testing me, Sarah whispered back. He wants me to snap so he can get me fired. Don't give him the satisfaction, Marco advised. Just kill them with kindness. Sarah nodded and took the expensive wine from Marco. She walked back to the table. Ah, finally, Trent shouted, banging the table. We were about to die of thirst. The 2015 Chateau Margaux, gentlemen, Sarah announced, presenting the label. Brad waved his hand. Just pour it. We know what it is. Sarah carefully cut the foil and uncorked the bottle. She poured a tasting amount into Brad's glass. He swirled it violently, took a sip, and swished it around his mouth like mouthwash before spitting it back into the glass. Corked, Brad declared loudly. The restaurant went quiet. Several nearby tables turned to look. Sarah froze. Sir, Marco just inspected the cork. It's in perfect condition. Are you calling me a liar? Brad's voice rose an octave. I said it's corked. It tastes like vinegar and wet dog. Take it away. Bring another one. That's an $800 bottle, sir. If I open another and you reject it. Are you deaf? Brad stood up, towering over her. I said take this swill away. He shoved the glass toward her. The red wine sloshed over the rim, splashing onto Sarah's white shirt and the expensive tablecloth. "Look what you did!" Brad shouted, shifting the blame instantly. "You clumsy idiot! You almost ruined my suit. You pushed it," Sarah stammered, grabbing a towel to dab at her shirt. The stain was spreading, a dark crimson mark over her heart. "I did no such thing," Brad lied, looking at his friends for confirmation. "She tripped," Hunter chimed in, laughing. "Saw it with my own eyes. Tripped over her own feet." "Incompetent," Trent muttered. The manager, Mr. Henderson, no relation to her landlord, but equally terrifying, rushed over. "Is everything all right, Mr. Sterling?" "No, it is not," Brad said, smoothing his lapel. "Your waitress is drunk or something. She spilled wine everywhere and tried to serve us vinegar. I expect this bottle to be taken off the bill." Mr. Henderson turned to Sarah, his eyes cold. He didn't ask for her side of the story. At L'Argent, the customer was God. "Sarah, clean this up immediately. Go to the back and change your shirt. Mr. Sterling, I apologize deeply. The bottle is on the house, and I will bring a fresh one personally." Sarah felt a tear escape, hot and humiliating, tracking down her cheek. She wiped it away furiously. She wouldn't cry in front of them. As she scrubbed the table, Brad leaned in close, his voice a low whisper so the manager couldn't hear. "Make sure you scrub hard, sweetheart. That's all you're good for. Cleaning up after people who actually matter." Sarah's hand stopped moving. Rage, white-hot and blinding, flared in her chest. But she thought of the tuition bill. She thought of the eviction notice. She lowered her head. "Yes, sir," she whispered. From the corner table in the shadows, Arthur watched. He had put down his book. He slowly removed his reading glasses, his grey eyes narrowing, as he watched the scene unfold. He signaled for Marco. "Yes, Arthur?" Marco asked, leaning down. He was the only one who treated the old man with respect, assuming he was just a lonely neighborhood retiree. "That bottle of Margot," Arthur said quietly. "Don't throw it away. Bring the bottle and a glass to my table." "Arthur, the customer said it's corked. It's garbage." "Humor me," Arthur said, his voice possessing a sudden, strange authority. Marco hesitated, then nodded. He brought the rejected bottle to Arthur. The old man poured a glass, swirled it, and took a sip. He closed his eyes, savoring the flavor. Perfect. Oak cherry tobacco. Not a hint of cork. Arthur set the glass down. He pulled a small, battered notebook from his tweed jacket pocket and clicked a pen. He looked at table 4, specifically at Brad Sterling. "Strike 1, Arthur whispered, writing something down. The kitchen was a war zone of clattering pans and shouting chefs, but for Sarah it was a sanctuary compared to the dining room. She leaned against the stainless steel counter, taking shallow breaths. Her new shirt, borrowed from a bus boy, was slightly too large, the cuffs rolled up clumsily. "Table 4 is asking for you," the expeditor barked, sliding 4 massive plates onto the pass. 4 tomahawk ribeyes, A5 Wagyu, medium rare, and, God help us, they want the 24-carat gold leaf topping. Sarah stared at the steaks. Each one was the size of a small child's torso, glistening with fat and covered in edible gold foil. It was a grotesque display of wealth. The steaks alone cost $400 apiece. She lifted the heavy tray, her shoulders aching. As she walked back onto the floor, she saw Arthur at his corner table. He was watching her again. He raised his teacup in a silent toast of encouragement. It gave her just enough strength to walk toward the lion's den. When she arrived at table 4, the mood had shifted. They were louder now, fueled by the expensive wine and their own egos. "Here she is," Brad announced, clapping his hands mockingly. "The comeback queen. Did you manage to walk all the way here without falling down?" Hunter and Trent laughed, pounding the table. Spencer, the quiet one, looked down at his lap, fiddling with his fork. "Your steaks, gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. She placed the plates down. The gold leaf shimmered under the low ambient lights. "Wait," Brad said, holding up a hand before she could leave. "We need a photo for the gram. Sarah, take the picture." He shoved his latest model iPhone into her hand. "And make sure you get the lighting right. If I look fat, you're taking it again." Sarah held the phone. The four men leaned in, putting on fake, winning smiles. They looked like captains of industry, the future leaders of America. But through the camera lens, Sarah just saw 4 bullies. "Say net worth!" Trent shouted. "Net worth!" they chorused. She snapped the photo and handed the phone back. Brad inspected it, zooming in. "Acceptable. You may go." Sarah turned to leave, but Brad's voice stopped her. "Actually, hang on. We have a question. A bet, really." She paused. "Yes, sir. Hunter here says that with tips, a waitress like you probably pulls in, what, $2,000 a month? I say it's less. I say you're barely clearing minimum wage because, well, look at the service." Brad swirled his wine. "So, who's closer? We've got $500 on the line." It was a humiliating question. They were betting on her poverty. "I don't discuss my finances with customers," Sarah said tightly. "Oh, come on," Hunter goaded, tearing a piece of gold-covered meat with his teeth. "Don't be shy. We're job creators. We understand the economy. Just tell us. Are you poor, or are you dirt poor?" Sarah gripped her tray. "I'm a law student at Columbia, sir. I work here to pay my tuition. My financial status is temporary. My dignity is not." The table went silent for a second. Then they erupted into laughter. "A lawyer!" Brad gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "She thinks she's going to be a lawyer." "Oh, honey, do you know who my father is? He keeps an entire firm of lawyers on retainer just to handle his parking tickets. You're not going to be a lawyer. You're going to be the girl who fetches coffee for my lawyers." "Brad, that's enough," Spencer said, quietly. It was the first time he had spoken up. Brad turned on him, his eyes snapping with malice. "Excuse me, Spencer. Did the charity case want to speak? Remember, Daddy got you this internship. Don't grow a spine now. It doesn't suit you." Spencer shut his mouth, his face turning red. "That will be all, Sarah," Brad said, dismissing her. "Go fetch us more napkins. You're boring us now." Sarah walked away, her heart pounding a rhythm of pure fury. "Finish law school," she repeated to herself. "Sue people like him. Take everything they have." Back at table 6, Arthur had finished his tea. He signaled Marco. "Another pot, Arthur?" "No, Marco. I need you to bring me the house phone. The cordless one." Marco looked confused but obeyed. He brought the phone to the table. Arthur dialed a number from memory. It was a private number, one that bypassed the secretaries and assistants of the city's elite. "Hello?" A gruff voice answered on the other end. "Gerald," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding baritone that sounded nothing like the frail old man he appeared to be. "It's Arthur. Arthur Harrington." There was a pause, then the sound of a chair scraping as the person on the other end stood up. "Mr. Harrington!" "My God, sir. I haven't heard from you in... Is everything all right with the merger?" "The merger is fine, Gerald. I'm calling about your son." "Brad." "Brad? Is he in trouble? Is it the police?" "Not the police." "Not yet," Arthur said, watching Brad throw a piece of bread at Hunter. "I'm observing him in a professional setting. I'm currently sitting behind him at L'Argent. He's wearing a suit that costs more than my first car, and he's behaving like a feral animal." I apologize, sir. He's young, high spirits." "He's cruel, Gerald, and he's representing your family name, and by extension, since your firm manages my portfolio, he represents my interests." Arthur paused, letting the weight of his name settle. "I don't do business with cruel men." "Watch your phone, Gerald. I'll be texting you shortly." Arthur hung up. He picked up his pen. "Strike 2, he whispered. The meal at table 4 lasted another hour. They were loud, obnoxious, and messy. By the time they were finished, the white tablecloth was stained with red wine, steak sauce, and grease. It was 11:00 p.m. The restaurant was thinning out. Sarah approached the table with the leather folder containing the bill. She was dreading this moment. She knew, instinctively, that they weren't going to make this easy. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else? Coffee? Dessert?" "Just the damage," Brad said, leaning back and patting his stomach. Sarah placed the folder on the table. Brad opened it. He whistled. 5,400. "Not bad. I've spent more on a pair of shoes." He looked at the bill, scanning the items. Then his expression changed. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Sarah couldn't see what it was. With a sleight of hand he must have practiced, he dropped the object onto his half-eaten plate of mashed potatoes. "Excuse me," Brad said, his voice suddenly loud and theatrical. "Excuse me!" Sarah froze. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Is there a problem?" Brad stood up, picking up his plate. He thrust it toward her face. "Do you see this? Do you see this disgusting thing in my food?" Sarah looked closely. Lying in the potatoes was a long, coarse, black hair. Sarah touched her own hair. It was blonde, pulled back tightly in a bun and covered with a hairnet. "Sir, that's a black hair. I have blonde hair, and the chef is bald." "Are you calling me a liar?" Brad roared. "Are you saying I put this here? This is unsanitary. This is a health code violation. I could have choked." "It's clearly not my hair, sir," Sarah argued, her voice trembling. She knew she shouldn't argue, but the injustice was too sharp. "It's from this dirty restaurant." Brad slammed the plate down, shattering the china. "I'm not paying for this. In fact, I'm not paying for any of it. You ruined our appetite. You ruined our night." "You ate everything, sir. You ate the steaks. You drank the wine." "And then I found this." Brad pointed at the hair. "The experience is tainted. Get your manager. Now." Mr. Henderson rushed over, looking pale. "Mr. Sterling, please keep your voice down. What is the matter?" "Your waitress poisoned my food with hair," Brad lied smoothly. "And then she accused me of planting it. I've never been so insulted in my life. My father will be hearing about this. He knows the health inspector personally." Mr. Henderson looked at the shattered plate, then at Sarah. He didn't look at the hair. He looked at the wrist of Brad Sterling, which bore a Rolex worth 50,000. He made a calculation. "Sarah," Mr. Henderson hissed, "what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. It's not my hair. Look at it." "Stop making excuses," the manager snapped. He turned to Brad with a subservient smile. "Mr. Sterling, I am horrified. Absolutely horrified. Please allow me to take care of this." "I expect the bill to be wiped," Brad said, crossing his arms. "All of it." The wine as well?" Mr. Henderson hesitated. The wine alone was thousands of dollars. "Everything. Or I tweet about this to my 50,000 followers, and I call the health department in the morning." Mr. Henderson swallowed hard. "Consider it done, sir. The meal is on the house. Please accept our deepest apologies." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Henderson, you can't. That's my entire section's revenue for the night." "Quiet, Sarah," Henderson snapped. Brad grinned. He had won. He picked up the bill folder and tossed it on the floor. "Come on, boys, let's go. This place is a dump anyway." They stood up, laughing. Trent high-fived Brad. Classic man. Absolute classic. But Brad wasn't done. He stopped in front of Sarah. "You know," he said, leaning in close, "usually, even when I get a meal comped, I leave a tip for the effort. I was going to leave you $100, just for pity." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He held it out to her. Sarah reached for it mechanically. She needed it. She desperately needed it. As her fingers grazed the paper, Brad let go. The bill fluttered to the floor, landing in a puddle of spilled wine and steak sauce. "Oops," Brad smirked. "Pick it up." Sarah looked at him, then at the money on the dirty floor. "I said pick it up," Brad commanded. "If you want it, get on your knees and pick it up. Show us where you belong." The restaurant was deadly silent. The other diners were watching. The staff was watching. Sarah looked at Mr. Henderson. The manager looked away, refusing to intervene. She looked at the money. It was groceries for 2 weeks. It was part of the rent. Slowly, painfully, Sarah bent her knees. She began to lower herself towards the floor. Brad laughed, pulling out his phone to record it. "That's it. Good dog. Stop." The voice was not loud, but it cracked through the air like a whip. It commanded instant, absolute silence. Sarah froze, halfway to the floor. Brad turned around, annoyed. "Who said that? Mind your own business, Grandpa." Arthur was standing up. He had left his booth. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the center of the room. He held his battered paperback in one hand and his cane in the other. But he didn't lean on the cane. He carried it like a weapon. He stopped between Sarah and Brad. He looked down at the waitress. "Stand up, my dear," Arthur said gently. "Do not kneel for this trash." Brad's face turned purple. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? You're just some old bum eating soup in the corner. Get out of my face before I have you thrown out." Arthur turned to face Brad. The old man's eyes were cold, hard steel. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You think I'm a bum?" Arthur asked softly. "And you think you're rich?" "I know I'm rich," Brad scoffed. "My last name is Sterling. I'm worth more than your entire life." Arthur chuckled. He reached into his inside pocket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen once and held it up. "It's funny you mentioned the name Sterling," Arthur said, "because I was just texting the owner of Sterling & Co." "You were texting my dad?" Brad laughed nervously. "Yeah, right, like you have his number." "I do," Arthur said. "In fact, I have everyone's number, including the number of the bank that holds the mortgage on this building, and the number of the board of directors for the country club you play golf at." Arthur took a step closer. "You see, Brad, you have money. Daddy's money. But you don't have power. Power is the ability to sit in a corner wearing a $10 jacket and decide whether a boy like you has a future." Arthur looked at Mr. Henderson, the manager. "Henderson!" Arthur barked. The manager jumped. Who are you?" Arthur reached into his pocket again. He pulled out a black card. It wasn't a credit card. It was an identification card, a heavy metal card with a gold crest. "I am Arthur Harrington," he said. "I own the Harrington Group, which means I own the bank that owns the holding company that owns this restaurant chain." The color drained from Mr. Henderson's face so fast he looked like a ghost. Mr. Harrington, the chairman, we didn't know. No one told us you were coming." "I like to inspect my investments anonymously," Arthur said. "And tonight, I am very disappointed in my investment." Arthur turned back to Brad. The young man was trembling. He knew the name Harrington. Everyone in finance knew the name Harrington. It was the top of the food chain, the whale that ate the sharks. "Now," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Pick up that $100 bill." Brad blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Arthur said. "Pick it up, on your knees." Brad looked around. His friends had backed away. Hunter was pretending to text. Spencer was looking at the floor. He was alone. I can't. My suit." "I don't care about your suit," Arthur roared, his voice filling the restaurant. "Pick it up!" The silence in L'Argent was heavy, suffocating. It felt less like a restaurant and more like a courtroom just before a verdict. Brad Sterling stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and rapidly crumbling arrogance. He looked at the old man, then at the dirty floor where the $100 bill lay, sodden in steak sauce. "You're bluffing," Brad whispered, though his voice trembled. "You're just a crazy old man. You don't know my father." Arthur didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply tapped the speakerphone icon on his cell phone and held it up. Ringing. "Arthur?" The voice on the other end was crystal clear, echoing through the silent dining room. It was unmistakable. It was Gerald Sterling, a man whose voice was frequently heard on financial news channels. "Arthur, are you still there? I'm about to step into a board meeting, but—" "Gerald," Arthur interrupted, his eyes locked on Brad. "I have your son, Brad, standing in front of me. He seems to think I'm a crazy old bum. He also seems to believe that the Sterling family name gives him the license to abuse service staff and vandalize my property." There was a terrifying pause on the line. He did what?" Gerald's voice dropped. Put him on. Put him on right now." Arthur held the phone out toward Brad. "Your father would like a word." Brad's hands shook violently as he took the phone. He held it to his ear like it was a bomb. "Dad? Listen, this guy is lying. He's—" "Shut up!" Gerald screamed so loud that even without speakerphone, Sarah could hear it from 3 feet away. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to? Arthur Harrington owns the controlling stake in our firm, you idiot. He could dissolve the board tomorrow. He could bankrupt us by sneezing." "But Dad, he—" "Apologize," Gerald roared. "Do whatever he says. If you walk out of there and Mr. Harrington is not satisfied, don't bother coming home. I'll cut your cards. I'll write you out of the will. I swear to God, Brad. Fix this." The line went dead. Brad lowered the phone slowly. The color had completely vanished from his face. He looked like a man who had just seen his own execution. He looked at his friends for support. Hunter was suddenly very interested in the ceiling. Trent had physically moved 3 steps away, distancing himself from the blast radius. Spencer, the quiet one, was actually smiling faintly, looking at his shoes. Brad was alone. He turned to Arthur. "Mr. Harrington, sir, I didn't know. You thought she was weak," Arthur said, pointing his cane at Sarah. "You thought she didn't matter. That is your mistake. In my experience, the people who serve our food and clean our floors are the only ones who actually know how the world works." Arthur pointed to the floor. "The bill, Mr. Sterling. The sauce is drying." Brad swallowed hard. He looked at Sarah. For the first time all night, he actually saw her. He saw the exhaustion, the stained shirt, the humiliation he had caused. And now, the tables had turned. Slowly, excruciatingly, Brad Sterling, the golden boy, the heir, bent his knees. His expensive Italian suit trousers strained against his thighs. He lowered himself until his knees hit the hardwood floor. A gasp went through the restaurant. Several diners had their phones out, recording. Brad reached out with a trembling hand. He pinched the corner of the soggy $100 bill. It dripped red wine and brown sauce. "Stand up," Arthur commanded. Brad stood up, holding the dirty money. "Now," Arthur said, his voice hard as flint. "Apologize, and mean it. If I detect even a hint of sarcasm, I call your father back." Brad faced Sarah. His eyes were watery. His ego had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I'm sorry," he croaked. "Louder," Arthur said. "I'm sorry," Brad shouted, his voice cracking. I was a jerk. I lied about the hair. I made a mess. I'm sorry." Sarah looked at him. She didn't feel triumph. She just felt tired. "Just go," she whispered. "Just leave." "Not yet," Arthur said. He turned his gaze to the other 3 men. "The bill for the table is $5,400. Since Mr. Sterling here is having a bad night, I think it's only fair that his entourage pays the tab." Arthur looked at Hunter, Trent, and Spencer. "Split it 3 ways. Now. And tip 50%, or I call your fathers next." The 3 men scrambled for their wallets, faster than they had ever moved in their lives. Cards were thrown onto the table. "And you," Arthur said, turning back to Brad, "you're banned. From this restaurant. From every restaurant in my group. If I see your face in any of my establishments again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Get out." Brad turned and ran. He didn't wait for his friends. He sprinted toward the door, the heavy mahogany slamming shut behind him, sealing his humiliation. The heavy mahogany door slammed shut behind Brad Sterling, but the echo seemed to vibrate in the air long after he was gone. The restaurant was silent, not the polite silence of fine dining, but the stunned, breathless silence of a battlefield after the last cannon has fired. Arthur Harrington stood in the center of the room. He didn't look like a frail old man anymore. He stood with his back straight, radiating a cold, terrifying authority that filled every corner of the room. He slowly turned his gaze toward Mr. Henderson. The manager was trembling. He wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. He fixed his tie, forcing a plastic, servile smile onto his face as he took a step toward the billionaire. "Mr. Harrington," Henderson stammered, his voice pitching too high. "Sir, what a surprise. Truly. If we had known you were visiting, we would have prepared the private suite. We would have saved me the trouble of seeing the truth," Arthur interrupted, his voice low and smooth like crushed velvet. He walked slowly toward Henderson. Click, click, click. The sound of his cane hitting the floorboards was like a countdown. I don't understand, sir," Henderson gulped. "I was merely trying to manage a difficult situation. You know how these young heirs are. High spirits, very demanding. The customer is always right." Arthur finished the sentence for him, a look of absolute disgust crossing his face. "That is the refuge of a coward, Mr. Henderson." Arthur stopped inches from the manager's face. "I sat in that booth for 2 hours, Arthur said, gesturing to the shadows. "I drank your tea. I read my book. And I watched you hover around that table like a nervous waiter, desperate for a crumb of approval from a boy who hasn't earned a dime in his life. You saw him snap his fingers at my staff. You saw him throw food. You saw him degrade a young woman who is working harder to survive than you ever have." "Sir, I had to protect the restaurant's reputation," Henderson argued, finding a shred of defiance. "Mr. Sterling is a VIP. If I had kicked him out, the reviews, the scandal." "The scandal?" Arthur laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "You think that is the scandal? No, Henderson. The scandal is that you stood there and watched him force her to her knees." Arthur pointed a shaking finger at Sarah, who was still standing by table 4, clutching her tray like a shield. "When you allowed that to happen, Arthur said, his voice rising to a thunderous boom that made the silverware rattle. "You didn't just fail her. You failed me. You failed the very concept of leadership. A manager's job isn't to protect the profits from the people. It's to protect the people who make the profits." Arthur held out his hand, palm open, expectant. "Your keys," Arthur commanded. Henderson froze. "Sir?" "The keys to the office, the swipe card for the register, and that pin on your lapel that says General Manager." Arthur's eyes were hard as flint. "Hand them over. Now." "But I've worked here for 10 years. You can't just fire me over one incident." "I can," Arthur said calmly. "And I just did. You're done, Henderson. You're not just fired. You are blacklisted. I will personally ensure that no restaurant in this city, from the 5-star hotels to the burger joints, will ever trust you with a staff again." Trembling violently, Henderson unpinned his name tag. He dropped the keys into Arthur's hand. He looked small, defeated, and utterly stripped of his power. "Get out," Arthur whispered. "Before I have security, throw you out like the trash you allowed into my dining room." Henderson hung his head. He walked past the kitchen, where the chefs and busboys were watching. He didn't look at them. He scurried out the back door and into the night, leaving his career behind him. A collective sigh seemed to go through the room. Marco, the sommelier, looked at Arthur and gave a subtle nod of respect. The chefs returned to the stoves, but with a new energy. The heavy blanket of oppression had been lifted. Arthur turned his attention to Sarah. She hadn't moved. She was staring at the floor, her shoulders shaking. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of humiliation and fear. She had just seen her boss fired. She assumed she was next. Arthur's demeanor changed instantly. The titan of industry vanished, replaced by the grandfatherly figure from the corner booth. He walked over to her, his steps soft. "Sarah?" he asked gently. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, mascara slightly smudged. "Am I fired too, Mr. Harrington? I really need this job. I didn't mean to cause a scene." "Fired?" Arthur looked genuinely heartbroken that she would even think that. "My dear girl, you are the only reason I haven't shut this entire place down tonight." He reached into the breast pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a clean, white linen handkerchief. He offered it to her. "Wipe your face, child. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You stood tall when others would have crumbled." Sarah took the handkerchief, dabbing her eyes. I felt so small. He treated me like I was nothing." "He is a fool," Arthur said firmly. "He mistakes price for value. He knows the price of everything on this menu, but he knows the value of nothing. You, on the other hand, you have value." Arthur turned to the table where Brad's friends, Hunter, Trent, and Spencer, had hastily abandoned their credit card receipts. He walked over and picked them up. He adjusted his glasses and read the totals. "Let's see," Arthur mused. 50% tip on a $5,000 bill, plus the extra penalties I implied. He walked back to Sarah and pressed the merchant copies into her hand. $3,200, Arthur announced. "Consider this hazard pay. Handling toxic waste requires a premium fee." Sarah stared at the slips of paper. Her hands shook. "Mr. Harrington, this covers my rent for months. It covers the tuition installments I missed. I can't accept this." "You earned it," Arthur insisted. "Legally, it's yours. Morally, it's the least they could do." He paused, leaning on his cane, studying her face. "You mentioned earlier, when you were serving my tea, that you are studying law at Columbia. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Sarah nodded. "Second year. Corporate law. And you're working double shifts here to pay for it? My scholarship only covers half. The rest is on me. Arthur nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. I have a legal department at the Harrington Group. We handle international mergers, acquisitions, intellectual property rights. It's a shark tank, much like this restaurant, but the sharks wear better suits. He smiled kindly. I need people who don't break under pressure. I need people who can look a bully in the eye and not blink. I need people who understand what it's like to work for a living, not just inherit a living. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with simple black text. Report to this address on Monday morning at 9:15 a.m., Arthur said, placing the card on top of her serving tray. Ask for Eleanor, my personal assistant. Tell her Arthur sent you. Sarah looked at the card, then back at him, her breath catching in her throat. Sir. What is this? It's an offer, Sarah. A paid paralegal internship at Harrington Legal. It comes with a full stipend that covers the remainder of your tuition at Columbia. You won't have to carry trays anymore. You'll be carrying briefcases. The world seemed to stop spinning for Sarah. The noise of the restaurant faded away. The smell of steak and wine disappeared. All she saw was the kind face of the man who had just changed her life. You're serious? She whispered, a fresh tear tracking down her cheek. I never joke about talent, Sarah. Arthur smiled. You have a fire in you. Don't let the world put it out. Now go home. Study. Get some sleep. You have a big career starting on Monday. Arthur patted her shoulder, a warm, reassuring weight. He turned and began to walk toward the exit, his cane tapping a rhythm of victory. Good night, Sarah, he called out without looking back. Sarah clutched the business card to her chest, sobbing a laugh of pure relief. Good night, Arthur. Thank you. As the heavy doors swung shut behind him, Sarah looked around the restaurant. It was the same room, but everything had changed. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a future lawyer, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never let anyone make her kneel again. The elevator inside the Harrington Tower moved so smoothly it felt like standing still. It was a glass capsule shooting up the side of a 90-story steel monolith in the heart of Manhattan. Inside, Sarah Miller checked her reflection in the glass. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the terrified waitress of 5 years ago. Gone was the ill-fitting uniform and the messy bun held together by a hairnet. She wore a bespoke navy suit that cost more than her old car. Her hair was styled in a sharp, professional bob. On her wrist, a Cartier tank watch ticked away the seconds, a graduation gift from Arthur Harrington himself. She held a leather briefcase embossed with gold initials, SM. Good morning, Ms. Miller, the receptionist chirped as the elevator doors slid open on the 80th floor. The 10 a.m. appointment is already in conference room B. He's been pacing. Thank you, Jessica, Sarah smiled, cool and confident. Let him pace. Desperation builds character. She walked down the hallway. The walls were lined with art, but the floor-to-ceiling windows offered the real view. The entire city of New York, looking like a toy set below. She was at the top of the world now. She reached conference room B. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouette of a man. He was hunched over, his posture screaming defeat. Sarah took a deep breath. She wasn't nervous. She had spent 5 years preparing for this specific meeting, even if she didn't know it at the time. She pushed the door open. The air in the room was stale, smelling of cold coffee and anxiety. Sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table was Brad Sterling. Time had not been kind to him. The golden boy of l'argent was gone. In his place sat a man who looked 10 years older than his actual age. His face was puffy, his eyes shadowed with dark circles. He wore a suit, but it was clearly an old one, slightly too tight around the waist, the fabric shining with wear at the elbows. Sterling & Co. had not just failed, it had imploded. After Gerald Sterling's heart attack, Brad had taken over as CEO. In less than 2 years, he had gambled the firm's assets on volatile crypto schemes and bad real estate deals. Now, the company was being liquidated, and Harrington Group was the vulture circling the carcass. Brad jumped when Sarah entered. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her briefcase. He looked at the power she radiated. "Counselor," Brad said, his voice raspy. He tried to put on a brave face, a ghost of his old arrogance. "I hope you have the papers. I have another meeting at noon, so let's make this quick." It was a lie. Sarah knew it was a lie. He didn't have a meeting. He didn't even have an office anymore. Sarah didn't say a word. She walked to the head of the table, Arthur's usual seat, and placed her briefcase down with a heavy thud. She sat down, interlacing her fingers. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I am Sarah Miller, junior partner at Harrington Legal. I represent the acquisition team." Brad nodded, sweating. "Right. Ms. Miller, look, about the valuation, the initial offer was insultingly low. My father's legacy is worth more than—" "Your father's legacy," Sarah interrupted, "is currently $40 million in debt. You have 3 pending lawsuits for fraud, and the SEC is auditing your personal accounts. You aren't in a position to negotiate, Brad. You are here to surrender." Brad flinched at the use of his first name. He finally looked up, really looked at her, trying to gauge this woman who spoke with such brutal precision. He squinted. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Do I know you?" he asked. "You look familiar." Sarah didn't smile. She simply reached up and touched a lock of her hair. "Perhaps," she said softly. "I used to work in the service industry. I have a good memory for faces. And for orders." Brad stared at her. The gears in his mind were turning, grinding against the rust of his own narcissism. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the voice. Then the color drained from his face completely. The memory hit him. The steakhouse, the wine spilled on the shirt, the demand to kneel. "No way," he whispered, sinking back into his chair. You're the waitress. The one with the hair in the food." "The hair you put in the food," Sarah corrected him. "And yes, I am the waitress you tried to get fired. I am the woman you told to get on her knees for $100. Brad looked around the room as if looking for a camera, for a prank, for anything to save him from this reality. "But that was years ago. You were nobody." "And you were somebody," Sarah said, leaning forward. "Funny how the world turns, isn't it? You told me that night that I would never be a lawyer. You told me I'd be fetching coffee for your lawyers." She opened the file in front of her. "Well, Brad, I fired your lawyers this morning. They were incompetent, just like their boss." Brad was shaking now. His hands gripped the edge of the table. "Look, Sarah, Ms. Miller, that night, we were kids. We were drunk. It was a misunderstanding. You can't hold a grudge over—" "I don't hold grudges," Sarah said icily. "I hold people accountable. Arthur Harrington taught me that." She slid a heavy stack of documents across the polished table. They stopped perfectly in front of him. "These are the surrender documents for Sterling & Co., Sarah explained. "By signing this, you transfer all remaining assets, client lists, and intellectual property to the Harrington Group. In exchange, we will absorb your corporate debt. You walk away with nothing. No payout, no golden parachute, just a clean slate and zero debt." "Nothing," Brad's voice cracked. But I need something to start over. A stipend, a consultancy fee, anything. Sarah looked at him. She remembered the feeling of the cold floor against her knees. She remembered the laughter of his friends. Actually, Sarah said, there is one provision. Brad's eyes lit up with hope. Yes. Clause 14b, Sarah pointed to the bottom of the page. We are acquiring your company headquarters building. We will be retaining the custodial and maintenance staff. However, the in-house cafeteria is understaffed. Brad blinked. I don't understand. We're hiring, Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. For the cafeteria, washing dishes, serving lunch. It pays minimum wage plus tips, if the customers are feeling generous. Brad stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The humiliation was absolute. You want me to wash dishes? It's honest work, Brad, Sarah said. You might learn something about value, or you can refuse to sign, go bankrupt, and face the SEC investigation without our legal shield. It's your choice. Brad looked at the pen. He looked at Sarah. He realized, with a crushing finality, that he had no choice at all. With a trembling hand, he picked up the pen. He signed his name on the line, signing away the empire his father built, signing away his pride. Brad Sterling. He dropped the pen. It rolled across the table. Done, he whispered. Can I go now? One more thing, Sarah said, as she collected the papers. Brad paused at the door, looking back like a beaten dog. Sarah reached into her purse. She pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She didn't throw it on the floor. She didn't make him kneel. She simply walked over and tucked it into the breast pocket of his cheap, worn-out suit. For a cab, she said. It looks like it's going to rain. And Brad? Yeah, he choked out. Try to be kind to the driver, she said. You never know who they might be one day. Brad didn't answer. He couldn't. He turned and fled the room, disappearing into the hallway, out of her life, and into the obscurity he deserved. Sarah walked to the window. She looked out at the skyline of New York City. The sun was breaking through the clouds, bathing the skyscrapers in gold. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. Did he sign? Sarah smiled and typed back. He signed. Case closed. She put the phone away, smoothed her suit, and walked out of the room. She had a meeting with the board of directors in 10 minutes. She had work to do. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call the long game. Sarah didn't just get revenge, she got success. She proved that the best way to get back at the people who doubt you, abuse you, or look down on you is to simply become better than they could ever imagine. Brad lost his money, his company, and his pride, all because he couldn't treat a waitress with basic human decency. I hope this story reminds you that no matter where you start, whether you're cleaning tables or struggling to pay bills, your current situation is not your final destination. Keep working, keep your head up, and watch out for the Arthurs in your life who might just give you that one chance you need. If this story gave you chills, please smash that like button. It helps the YouTube algorithm share this karma with more people. And tell me in the comments, do you think Sarah was too hard on Brad at the end, or was offering him a job in the cafeteria the perfect punishment? I read every comment. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next drama. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.